Hey guys. Tonight we find ourselves stepping into a palace long abandoned by time. You walk barefoot across its icy marble floors, every step echoing like whispers in a tomb. The scent of old incense clings stubbornly to the silent air. Faint notes of myrrh, rose, and something darker you can't quite place. Overhead, grand domes stretch into shadows, their mosaics shattered by earthquakes no one remembers. Moonlight slips through the broken arches, catching dust motes that swirl like ghostly dancers around you. At the end of a vast hall, you see it. A statue, but not just any statue. This one is so lifelike it steals your breath. Carved from milky stone veined with gray, it depicts a man in royal robes, his crown slightly tilted as if caught mid-fall. Tears streak down his cheeks, frozen in silent agony. His lips are parted, mid-plea, as though he were calling for help the moment the sculptor trapped him in marble. You feel an odd compulsion to approach. Each step closer sends a chill crawling up your spine. The cold radiating off him seeps into your bones, but you can't stop. His eyes, God's. His eyes look alive beneath the moonlight's silver glow. They shimmer with sorrow so raw your chest tightens painfully. And then the statue blinks. Stone eyelids slide over eyes too human to be trapped in rock. You stagger back, heart pounding so loud it drowns out the distant howl of desert wind. A low rumble rises from deep within his chest, vibrating through the marble floor beneath your feet. The sound tastes like thunder rolling over salt flats, heavy with promise and doom. He speaks. His voice is gravel and grief, echoing off cavernous walls. I am not a statue. His words ripple through the hall, stirring tattered banners hanging limp from vaulted ceilings. For a moment, it feels like the entire palace exhales, columns groaning, cracked tiles creaking, ancient shadows trembling in corners long untouched by light. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. So post your location and local time down below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. His eyes flick toward you, brimming with sorrow as deep as desert wells. Listen, he whispers, his voice catching on each syllable like wind snagging dry reeds. Listen to my story, for I was once Shamaran, king of black sands. He tells you his kingdom flourished beyond imagining. Its cities glittered under a merciless sun, domes of beaten gold blazing so brightly sailors far out at sea used them as beacons. Historians still argue whether the famous Black Sands towers truly reached heights that rivaled Babylon's ziggurats, or whether those were myths to impress rival caliphs. At his court, poets recited verses dripping with honeyed flattery, while eunuch scribes inked royal decrees on parchment made from hammer-flattened papyrus reeds. The scent of cardamom and roasted lamb always hung in banquet halls, mingling with frankincense smoke curling lazily toward painted ceilings. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Some nobles believed breathing frankincense each dawn purified their blood of night spirits that caused bad dreams. You wonder, fleetingly, if tonight you should have tried it too? But as he speaks, his eyes dim with remembered pain. His queen, Zuleika, was as beautiful as the moon rising over desert dunes. But her heart, he says, hid shadows deeper than any oasis well. He describes her with such aching tenderness that jealousy flickers ghost-like through your chest. Her laughter, he recalls, was like silver coins pouring onto silk. Her touch, a balm of cool rosewater. Her gaze, though, her gaze often drifted to the palace sorcerer. Here his mouth twists into a bitter smile. Had I watched them more closely, he rasps. Instead of worrying about camel trade routes and tribute from desert tribes, perhaps none of this would have happened. The hall falls silent again. Only the wind sighs through cracked stained glass windows. You stare at his trembling lips, at tears glinting in moonlight upon stone cheeks. Part of you wants to wake up from this, because statues shouldn't speak. But part of you wants to hear every broken, cursed word. Because tonight, sleep will not come easily, and you probably won't survive this kingdom's tragedy without carrying away a few curses of your own. His voice drops to a whisper. Will you hear the rest? He asks. And though fear coils tight in your chest, you nod. After all, you've already stepped into his prison. You may as well hear how his world was lost. The statue's sorrowful eyes fix on yours as his story continues to unspool. Thread by trembling thread. His voice, still echoing off the ruined marble, trembles with quiet rage now. Rage turned inward after centuries of helplessness. I was king, he says softly, almost to himself. King of black sands. My people bowed to me. My warriors rode for me. My scribes inked my words into law. But what is a king? He asks, gaze darkening. When the queen at his side craves a different throne? His lips twitch in bitterness as he tells you of the first signs of her betrayal. Small things, he says. Always small things at first. She stopped wearing the amethyst ring he had given her on their wedding night. She grew quiet at dinner, eyes drifting over his shoulder toward the shadows where the court sorcerer always stood. Silent and pale, hands folded into his embroidered sleeves. Historians still argue whether that sorcerer, known only in fragmented records as Kadir the Indigo, was truly a practitioner of dark arts, or merely a learned astronomer whose knowledge frightened superstitious courtiers. The king sighs deeply, stone shoulders shuddering. I was blind, he admits. Blind with devotion. When she stayed away from my bed, I believed she was ill. When she lingered too long in the gardens at night, I believed she sought moonlit peace. One night, though, peace was nowhere to be found. He remembers it so clearly that the memory replays around you. You smell desert jasmine drifting through cracked windows, hear distant reed flutes playing from the outer courtyard, see flickering torchlight casting restless shadows upon sandstone walls painted with lotus murals. He had been working late in his audience chamber, eyes bleary from reading tax records scrawled in crabbed script. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Ancient palace scribes often sharpened their reed pens by biting them with their own teeth, leaving faint bite grooves historians still find on unearthed writing tools. When at last he rose to return to their bedchamber, his guards looked away, as if they already knew something he didn't. His sandaled feet whispered across long blue carpets woven with stylized phoenixes. He pushed open the carved teak doors, expecting to find her asleep. Perhaps a lamp flickering beside her where she'd fallen asleep, reading. But the room was empty. The sheets were smooth and untouched. Her rose oil scent had already begun to fade. He wandered through the palace in confusion, whispering her name into silent halls. Zuleika, Zuleika. But only echoes answered him. Finally, he found himself before the entrance to the sorcerer's chambers. His guards refused to meet his eyes. His hand shook as he raised the bronze latch. Inside, lanterns burned low. The sorcerer's work tables were cluttered with scrolls, bronze astrolabes, jars of ground lapis and saffron. At the far end of the chamber stood Zuleika, robed in indigo silk, her hair tumbling loose down her back like a dark river under moonlight. She did not flinch when he entered. She merely turned, her eyes gleaming with triumphant cruelty. Beside her stood Kadir, his pale lips curved into a smile that was all teeth, no warmth. In his hands he held a twisted staff of carved ebony crowned with a serpent's skull. The king's breath caught in his chest as he realized the staff pulsed with a faint red glow. Blood magic, the oldest, foulest form of sorcery, forbidden under pain of execution in every kingdom from the Black Sands to the Pearl Coast. Historians still debate whether blood magic required literal blood sacrifice or whether the term referred to using the caster's life force itself. Either way, its practice was punishable by public flaying, a punishment Qadir had evaded by simply seducing the queen. "I demanded she return to me," the king whispers now, stone tears sliding silently down his cheek. But she only laughed, a laugh like cold river water. She told me my reign was over, that the kingdom was hers now, and Qadir would make it eternal. His voice grows harsh. "I called her by her name, my name for her, Zuleika, my moon, my rose. But she said her name was nothing now, because names belong to the past. And she was beyond the past." He closes his eyes, marble lids rasping. The memory weighs so heavily upon him that you feel it in your own chest, pressing down until your breath comes shallow. Suddenly, his eyes snap open again, glimmering with desperate urgency. "Listen closely," he says. "You must understand what I lost. You must understand what I was forced to witness." He tells you that as he tried to charge forward, to seize her wrists and shake the madness from her. Qadir raised his staff. There was no incantation, no dramatic chant echoing off the chamber walls. Just a whisper so soft it sounded like a lover's sigh, and then pain. Unimaginable pain as his body froze, hardening from his heart outward, his flesh calcifying, his limbs locking, his throat sealing with stone. The last thing he saw before darkness swallowed his senses was her face, not twisted in sorrow, nor lined with guilt, but smiling serenely, as though watching a sunset. That was what shattered him more than the magic itself. His voice falls silent for a moment. The winds beyond the broken palace windows moan low, like a funeral dirge through sand dunes. He sighs deeply, his chest rattling like stone about to crack. "I was a king," he whispers, "and now I am nothing more than grief carved in stone." You stand frozen before him, not from magic, but from the terrible, echoing truth of his words. His gaze searches yours for understanding, for pity, for a promise to keep listening, because deep down, you know this is only the beginning. The king's eyes flicker with a shadow of memory, and you feel him dragging you deeper into his tale, a tale heavy with betrayal's bitter taste. His stone lips part once more as the palace hall around you dims, moonlight flickering like candlelight across carved walls. You sense time folding, pulling you back into his past. "She betrayed me," he says, voice low with trembling rage. But it was not just her heart that wandered into darkness. It was her ambition. He tells you how, for years, the queen had nurtured a secret alliance with the sorcerer Qadir. At first, she visited his quarters under the guise of studying astronomy, learning to chart constellations that rose over the desert at midsummer to guide caravans safely across the dunes. Historians still argue whether queens of Black Sands were ever permitted to study the occult arts themselves, or whether Zuleika's lessons were the first and last such defiance. But it was not the movements of stars she craved to master. No. The king's voice drops to a rumbling whisper, echoing off the domed ceiling like approaching thunder. She wanted power no mortal queen had ever held. Qadir taught her of hidden forces flowing beneath the visible world, rivers of energy older than creation, humming with the promise of immortality and dominion. He pauses, eyes closing briefly. And, he sighs. She wanted him. You shift uncomfortably as his sorrow-laden gaze opens once more. The image is so clear in his mind that you see it. 2. The queen leaning over Qadir's table, her long midnight hair falling across scrolls inked with secret sigils, her lips brushing his ear as she laughed softly at some jest only they shared. The sorcerer's pale hand resting possessively on hers, fingertips stained blue from indigo dye and alchemical dust. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Sorcerers of his rank often stained their fingers purposefully with indigo, woad, or soot to signify their pact with spirits, each color marking a different patron force. Indigo was said to bind them to the voices of air, granting knowledge carried upon winds. Whether Qadir's stains were intentional or merely occupational, only the dead could now tell. The king sighs again, voice softening with a weary sadness. I loved her beyond reason, he admits. When my generals warned me of whispers, servants seeing shadows moving behind her lattice screens at midnight, I silenced them. When my vizier brought rumors that Qadir had been seen leaving her chambers before dawn, I banished him for slander. He laughs quietly, the sound brittle as dry reeds underfoot. Historians still argue whether kings of Black Sands were blinded by their own pride or by potions slipped into their wine cups. Perhaps both, perhaps neither. All I know is that love is a greater poison than any herb. He shifts slightly, stone muscles grinding with a harsh scrape. The sound grates against your ears and echoes into silence again. His marble fingers curl into a fist, knuckles cracking like splintering ice. One night, he says, voice lowering to a ragged whisper. I woke to find her gone. You see it through his eyes. The moon hanging heavy and yellow over the palace domes, casting their shadows long across silent courtyards. The empty space beside him on their wide bed of cedar and rosewood, her pillows still faintly warm where her head had lain. The air smelled of her rose oil, mingled with the faintest whiff of strange incense, clove, amber, and something sharp and metallic that burned his nostrils. He rose, panic clawing at his chest, and threw on his robe a deep blue silk embroidered with golden falcons. He strode through their chambers and into the darkened hall, heart thundering. Servants bowed hurriedly, their eyes averted, none daring to question the urgency in his step. The hallways seemed endless that night, each torch flickering wildly as though trying to warn him back. At last, he reached the sorcerer's chambers. No guards stood watch, another sign he should have noticed. Pushing open the heavy cedar door, he saw them, her head bent low, lips brushing Qadir's as they chanted in unison over a bronze basin filled with black liquid. Their shadows flickered together on the far wall, merging into one monstrous silhouette. His breath caught in his throat as he heard her voice, not sweet and melodic as he knew it, but rough with chanting power. She was no longer the woman he loved. She was something else, something ancient and terrible. She turned to him slowly, her eyes black from edge to edge, reflecting candle flames in tiny molten gold flecks. My king, she said, her voice echoing unnaturally. You should be asleep. I could not sleep without you, he whispered. Her lips curved into a smile, so gentle it might have been loving had her eyes not glimmered with inhuman darkness. Qadir raised his staff and spoke a word that hummed through the stones beneath his feet. Pain lashed him, sharp and cold. His limbs froze mid-step. His scream never left his throat as his flesh hardened, his heart seized, his eyes locked wide with betrayal. His final memory burned into stone was her face, serene, almost pitying, as she reached out to touch his cheek. Her hand was cold and smelled of blood and frankincense. The king's stone chest rattles as he draws a shuddering breath. His eyes glisten with trapped tears. "That," he whispers, "was the last sunrise I ever saw." The silence that follows weighs upon you like desert sand piling higher with each passing moment. You swallow hard, heart beating too quickly, feeling the edges of his grief scraping against your own bones. And yet you cannot turn away, because something within you needs to know how such a love turned to ruin, and what cursed fate still binds him here for a long moment. The statue remains silent, as though the weight of his memories drags him back into petrified stillness. Then, with a groan like ice cracking on a frozen river, his lips part once more. "You want to know how it felt?" he whispers, his voice trembling with rage and sorrow. "How it felt to be turned from flesh to stone in the blink of an eye?" He pauses, letting the question hang heavy between you, before his eyes narrow with remembered pain. "It was like being skinned alive by frost," he says softly, as if every nerve were dipped in molten silver and frozen instantly, the agony caught between burning and numbness. And then, nothing. Darkness closed over me. I thought I was dead. His gaze shifts, staring far beyond you into the shadows of the broken hall. But death would have been mercy. Qadir's spell was far crueler. My body froze, but my mind remained. I was aware, always aware, trapped within silent stone. He swallows, though his marble throat makes no motion and continues in a ragged whisper. I heard them laughing as they stripped my crown from my brow. I heard my guards' swords clatter to the marble as Qadir bound them in chains of flickering black light. I heard my people screaming in the streets as the palace gates burst open and demons poured forth from cracks in the earth. You flinch at the word demons, but he nods gravely. They were Qadir's conjurations, hideous spirits clothed in smoke and ember. Their claws left no mark upon stone walls, but where they touched flesh, it withered and blackened. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Ancient Babylonian demonology recorded similar creatures called utuku, spirits of the unburied dead who roamed palaces at night. Historians still argue whether such accounts were literal or metaphoric warnings against unguarded ambition. He sighs, his chest rattling with that grinding stone groan. My people fled. Those who remained were slaughtered or enslaved. My queen, she sat upon my throne. She wrapped her pale lover in her silks and crowned him king in my place. His voice cracks. And there I stood, unmoving, at the foot of the dais where I once held court. They draped banners over me to hide my frozen stare. I became decoration. He closes his eyes. The flickering moonlight makes shadows dance over his carved lids, giving the illusion of trembling tears. Years passed, seasons turned, dust gathered upon my head, pigeons nested upon my shoulders, and vines snaked through shattered windows to coil around my legs. He opens his eyes and looks at you with fierce sorrow. But that was not the end, because Qadir's spell was incomplete. He was powerful, but his arrogance blinded him. The magic that petrified me also tethered him to the material realm. Every time he tried to leave, to seek further power in forgotten places, his body withered, drawn back by my imprisoned soul. A faint smile ghosts across the king's stone lips, bitter and cold. And so he remained here. He poured his rage into dark experiments, seeking a way to sever our bond. The palace became his laboratory. Screams often echoed through these halls as he sacrificed any who dared approach. He falls silent, letting you imagine those centuries of horror, the marble chambers lit only by flickering candles, the air heavy with metallic incense, and the acrid stench of burnt offerings. You see shadowy figures chained to carved columns, their faces twisted in terror as Qadir's chants rose in maddened crescendo. Finally, the king's voice rises again, deep with aching grief. My queen, Zuleika, she became something else entirely. The price of her pact with Qadir was her humanity. Slowly, day by day, her flesh darkened into scales of jet and sapphire. Her eyes burned with blue fire, and horns curled from her temples like polished obsidian. You shiver, imagining her transformation, each scale forming with a ripple of searing pain, her bones shifting to accommodate her new, monstrous shape. He nods, reading your horror. She remained beautiful to me, he whispers. But her beauty was no longer human. She sat upon the throne of black sands, half woman, half demon, ruling over a ruined kingdom with an iron will and a voice that could bend men's minds. He pauses, and a faint rasp of bitter laughter slips from his marble chest. Historians still argue whether her transformation was part of Qadir's original spell or the price demanded by the demons who lent him power. But it matters little now. Her fate was sealed the moment she betrayed her own soul. His eyes pierce yours, luminous with moonlit tears. And so, the years turned to centuries. Qadir grew weaker, his body decaying under the strain of his magic. The palace fell to ruin. Sand swallowed the outer walls, burying gardens and fountains. Only this hall remained above the dunes, a monument to his arrogance and to my endless punishment. He breathes deeply, his voice growing faint, like dying wind across lonely sands. That is how I stand before you now, a king without a kingdom, a man without flesh, a soul trapped in silent darkness, watching the ruins of my world rot away. He closes his eyes again. The silence returns, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, you wonder if he has turned back into unthinking stone. But then, his voice drifts out once more, so softly you have to lean close to hear. And yet, there is more you must know, for not all hope was lost. Not yet. The king's stone eyes glimmer with a faint flicker of something you almost dare to call hope. The moonlight filtering through the shattered dome casts shifting patterns over his carved face, making it seem as though tears are streaming endlessly down his cheeks. You see, he whispers, voice hoarse with centuries of silence. Qadir's cruel sorcery came with a condition. The kingdom could never truly fall while I remained imprisoned. My petrified body anchored it to this realm, even as it rotted from within. He pauses, letting you absorb his words as the empty hall creaks softly under the cold desert wind. But there was a prophecy, he continues, his eyes growing distant as if reading words written upon the moon itself. Long before I ruled, an oracle spoke of the cursed king who would stand watch over his kingdom until one born of distant lands and royal blood would come to break his chains. You raise your eyebrows slightly. Prophecies rarely end well for the cursed. The king's lips twitch in a faint, bitter smile. Historians still argue whether such prophecies were written after the events they foretold to lend false grandeur to history's victors. Perhaps they are right. Yet, even carved in stone, a king clings to hope like drowning men clutch driftwood. His gaze sharpens as he continues. Many came over the centuries, desert nomads seeking shelter from sandstorms, tomb robbers hoping to plunder hidden treasures, priests driven mad by thirst as they wandered in search of holy relics. All who saw me fled in terror. Some threw stones at my face, believing me an evil spirit. Others wept and fell to their knees, praying for forgiveness for sins not their own. He exhales a shuddering sigh, eyes closing briefly. But then, one day, he arrived. His voice grows quiet, almost reverent, as the moonlight brightens overhead. "A prince," he says. "A young man in tattered robes, his hair tangled with sand and wind. His feet were blistered from the long crossing of the sun's anvil desert, and his skin burned bronze by days under the pitiless sun. You see him clearly now, walking barefoot into the ruined hall. His posture was proud, despite exhaustion, and his dark eyes burned with fierce intelligence. Slung across his back was a scabbard wrapped in worn indigo cloth, its golden hilt peeking through where the fabric had frayed. He called himself Prince Jahan." The king continues softly. "Exiled son of the Ruby Coast, driven away by jealous brothers after their father's death. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. The Ruby Coast was famed for its red coral reefs that tinted coastal sands a shimmering rose at dawn. Ancient traders believed walking barefoot on those sands cured fevers, a claim historians still argue over, though some suggest mineral content in the coral dust may have mildly antibacterial effects. The king's voice warms with remembered hope. Prince Jahan stumbled upon this palace in the middle of a sandstorm. He sought shelter, as all wanderers do when the sky turns gold with fury and scorpion-tailed clouds sweep the dunes. You see the storm as the king describes it. Burning winds whipping around the broken palace towers, sand hissing against shattered mosaics, rattling bone-dry date palm fronds into frantic applause. Lightning split the clouds above, illuminating the ancient domes in fleeting flashes of violent blue. Jahan entered my hall with cautious reverence." The king murmurs. "He saw my statue and did not flee. Instead, he approached, his eyes narrowed with curiosity rather than fear. You smile faintly, imagining the prince tilting his head, eyes scanning the frozen king for secrets, perhaps even whispering under his breath. What happened to you, old one?" "He built a fire in the brazier before me," the king says, his voice growing stronger. "He roasted scorpions and desert mice upon his blade, sharing his meager meal with me, though I could neither eat nor drink. Your stomach curls slightly at the thought of charred scorpion. But then again, survival in the desert is never delicate." The king chuckles quietly, catching your grimace. "A delicacy in the dunes," he says wryly. "And besides, roasted scorpion tastes like a mix of shrimp and despair." His eyes soften. As he ate, he spoke aloud. He told me stories of his travels, of merchant ships with silver sails, of cities built on floating lily-pad islands, of colossal sea serpents breaching in dawn mists. His words, they woke something within me. For the first time in centuries, I felt almost alive. He pauses, his stone face luminous in the moonlight. When the storm passed, he stood and bowed low before me. He said, "I do not know what binds you here, ancient king, but I swear upon my blood and honor, I will return to learn your truth and set you free." The king's voice trembles. No words had touched me so deeply in all my long imprisonment. You stand silently, feeling a warmth stir in your chest despite the chill of this ruined hall. For a moment, you forget your own fears, caught in the quiet triumph blooming in the statue's voice. "He left that morning," the king whispers, his eyes burning with memory. "But true to his oath, he did return. And with him, he brought hope." His lips part in a faint smile. But that is a tale for another breath. The hall falls silent once more, moonlight glowing bright upon his stone form, as if illuminating hope where there was only despair before. And though the desert winds howl mournfully beyond the broken walls, here, for a fleeting moment, you feel a quiet sense of destiny weaving its threads through time. The king's stone eyes gleam as moonlight drifts across his carved cheekbones. You sense the shift in his memory as he exhales another rattling sigh. the sound echoing softly across the silent marble hall. "When Prince Jahan returned," he whispers, "he was not alone." Your breath catches slightly as his voice softens into near reverence. Beside him walked a woman robed in saffron silk, her head covered with a veil embroidered in silver lotus petals. Her hands glowed with hennaed blessings, and her eyes, they burned with knowledge that could humble the proudest scholar. He pauses, gazing into the darkness as if seeing her again. "She was Layla al-Sahira," he says, voice filled with deep respect. "A sorceress scholar from the distant city of Ajanib. Historians still argue whether Ajanib truly existed as an oasis metropolis hidden beyond the Horn of Sands, or whether it was merely a metaphor for unattainable knowledge. But she was real as dawn." The king's chest rumbles with a quiet laugh. "She walked into my hall unafraid, the charms sewn along her robe sleeves clicking softly with each step. She raised one brow at Prince Jahan and said, 'This is your cursed king? He is handsome enough for a statue.' You can almost see Jahan blushing, his sun-darkened cheeks reddening further as he muttered something about respect for the dead, or the not quite dead. Layla only smirked, stepping forward to place her cool palm upon the stone king's cheek. Her touch, he murmurs, was like a river breeze in high summer. I felt her magic ripple against my prison, testing it, probing its weaknesses. She closed her eyes, chanting softly under her breath. Her words tasted ancient, syllables curling in the air like desert incense. For a moment, the stone around his chest loosened. He almost drew a real breath before the spell rebounded, burning her fingertips with blue fire. She snatched her hand back. The king whispers, sorrow threading his voice. Her palms smoked, skin blistering where the magic seared her. But she did not scream. She only frowned thoughtfully, as though bitten by a curious cat. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Many medieval alchemists believed pain was proof of proximity to truth. Some schools taught apprentices to place their hands in flames or acid to test devotion. Whether Layla shared such beliefs or merely possessed extraordinary courage, only the gods knew. Jahan knelt before the king's stone feet, his voice strong despite trembling with worry for Layla. I swore to free you, he said. We will find a way, even if it takes every drop of our blood and every moment of our lives. The king's eyes glisten in the dim light as he recounts this. No one had ever spoken to me with such devotion before, not even my own generals, not even... He falls silent for a moment, grief flickering across his carved face. Not even Zuleika. His voice drops to a whisper. Layla studied my prison for many days. She slept in this hall upon woven reed mats, her hair coiling around her like black silk. At dawn, she read from scrolls inked in vermilion upon sheepskin. At dusk, she brewed draughts of saffron, honey, and powdered emerald to sharpen her mind. Historians still argue whether powdered emerald enhanced focus or merely poisoned the drinker slowly. Layla, it seemed, tolerated her concoction with impassive serenity. One night, she sat cross-legged before the king, her lantern casting golden halos on the surrounding pillars. Your Majesty, she said softly, her voice as calm as moonlit water. You are bound not only by sorcery but by betrayal's wound. To break this curse, we must confront the one who sealed it. Her amber eyes glowed with quiet fury as she added, The queen who did this still rules in the shadows, does she not? The king nodded faintly, the motion almost imperceptible. She does, he whispered. Though centuries have passed, she remains half woman, half demon, a creature bound by the same spell that holds me here. Layla exhaled slowly. Then it is settled. We must face her. At this. Jahan stirred, his hand resting instinctively on the hilt of his curved blade. His eyes flickered with fear and determination. "If she still lives," he said, "she will not surrender willingly." Layla only smiled, a brief, feral curve of her lips that made the king's stone chest tighten with awe. "Nothing worth doing is ever easy, Prince." The king falls silent, his gaze locked upon you now. His eyes glimmer with tears that never fall. "Listen closely," he says, his voice rough with stone and sorrow. "That night, as the moon rose blood-red over the dunes, they vowed to confront her together. They vowed to end her reign and to free me from this prison." A faint breeze drifts through the ruined hall, stirring Layla's imagined veil and rustling phantom pages of her scrolls in your mind's eye. The king's stone chest rises and falls almost imperceptibly as his story flows into the waiting silence. "And so began their journey," he whispers. "A journey into darkness, deceit, and the remnants of a kingdom I no longer recognized." His eyes close briefly, and when they open again, they are clouded with pain and memory. "But that, my friend," he murmurs, "is a story for the next breath." The king's stone gaze locks onto yours, his pupils shimmering with trapped moonlight as he draws you deeper into his memory. "They left at dawn," he whispers. Prince Jahan and Layla al-Sahira gathered their few belongings and set out through the silent palace gates, stepping over fallen columns and broken mosaics, into dunes glowing gold under the rising sun. You see it through his words. The prince walking barefoot across sun-warmed sands, his indigo-wrapped sword slung over one shoulder. Layla drifting beside him like a saffron flame, her veil rippling in the dawn breeze, silver lotus petals catching pale morning light. They traveled east, the king continues, toward the queen's fortress beyond the Valley of Whispering Bones. His voice grows low and gravelly, tinged with a faint tremor. "Once, that valley was our kingdom's largest necropolis. Grand tombs lined its cliffs, each carved with the life stories of nobles, priests, and great warriors. Historians still argue whether the tomb inscriptions were written to immortalize deeds or to remind the living of death's approach. Both purposes were served." He exhales a grinding sigh. "But after my fall, the valley became cursed. Winds there carried whispers not of spirits, but of madness. Anyone who lingered heard voices urging them to slit their own throats with obsidian shards scattered among the dunes." You shiver at his words, imagining the skeletal ruins of mausoleums beneath black cliffs, their painted walls now flaked and scoured by endless sandstorms. The desert sun hangs like a blistering eye overhead as Jahan and Layla pick their way between toppled granite statues and shattered alabaster sarcophagi. Layla moved ahead lightly, her henna'd fingers tracing ancient glyphs etched into crumbling pillars. Her voice murmured protective prayers in forgotten dialects as she walked, silver charms sewn to her robe sleeves chiming softly with each step. Jahan followed close behind, scanning the shadows with narrowed eyes, his hand gripping the sword hilt beneath his indigo wrappings. His bare feet crunched over wind-blown bone fragments and shards of ceramic canopic jars. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Egyptian and Nubian burial traditions often included tiny carved faience, or ivory servants called ushabti, to work for the deceased in the afterlife. Some kingdoms, like Black Sands, adopted similar traditions, burying obsidian servant figurines to ensure luxury beyond death. Now, their shattered fragments littered the necropolis floor like discarded promises. As they walked, faint voices rose and fell around them, sighing from broken tomb mouths and whistling between weathered columns. Jahan shivered, muttering prayers to the moon goddess under his breath. Layla only rolled her eyes beneath her veil, her calm voice echoing softly. They are echoes. Do not give them your mind. At one point, they passed an open tomb, its doorway carved in the shape of a yawning jackal's mouth. Layla paused, studying it intently. Within, faint blue glows pulsed along the walls, glyphs written in phosphorescent paint that still shimmered after centuries of darkness. She stepped inside without hesitation. Jahan called after her, but she ignored him. He waited at the threshold, clutching his blade, scanning the empty dunes for signs of movement. The whispers here grew louder, curling around his ears in sibilant syllables. Come within, taste the darkness, bury your blade, bury yourself. Historians still argue whether these whispers were merely wind flowing through honeycomb tomb corridors or the final gasps of the unburied dead, trapped between realms by unfinished funerary rites. Minutes passed before Layla emerged, her amber eyes glowing with fierce purpose. She carried in her hands a fist-sized black stone carved with swirling sigils. A binding stone, she said simply. We will need it to subdue her power. Jahan swallowed nervously, glancing at the carved jackal mouth behind her. And if taking it angered whatever lay within, Layla only smirked beneath her veil, tucking the stone into her satchel. Then let it come. I am already tired of desert silence. They continued eastward, climbing over dunes the color of old ivory. At dusk, they crested a final ridge and saw it below them. The Queen's Fortress. The king's voice trembles with remembered horror as he describes it to you. Once, it was my summer palace. White marble walls wrapped around terraced gardens blooming with pomegranate and fig trees. Pools mirrored the sky, and bronze censers filled the air with rose and myrrh. He falls silent for a long, aching moment before continuing, his tone bitter as wormwood. Now, it is black. The marble walls are slick with shadows that move like oil. Thorned vines crawl up towers crumbled into jagged silhouettes against the blood-red sunset. Flocks of carrion crows wheel above the ramparts, crying in hoarse chorus. And at its highest balcony stands Zuleika. Your skin prickles as he describes her, her silhouette crowned with curling obsidian horns, a billowing cloak of midnight scales trailing behind her in the rising desert winds. Her glowing blue eyes pierce the twilight as she gazes down upon her ruined kingdom, her scaled hands gripping the balcony rail carved from human femurs. She was waiting for them, the king whispers. She had seen them coming since the moment they left my hall. For her, time is as malleable as clay. She sees all possible futures at once, like a spider feeling each tremor on her web. He pauses, stone tears sliding silently down his cheeks. And in all futures, she knew they would stand before her. The only question was who would remain standing after. The hall falls silent again, save for the moaning winds whispering through broken columns. You feel your pulse hammering as if you, too, were walking that final ridge at dusk. Remember, the king murmurs softly, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. Betrayal is never forgotten, and love, twisted by darkness, is the most terrifying curse of all. The king's stone chest rises and falls with a slow, grinding sigh as the memory deepens within him. His marble eyes dim for a moment, then flare softly with the glow of moonlight filtering through ruined arches above. They descended at dawn, he whispers, voice trembling with ancient dread. Jahan and Layla walked the broken causeway leading to her fortress gates, their shadows long upon cracked obsidian tiles. Flocks of crows wheeled above, crying warnings to gods who no longer listened. You see it clearly. Jahan gripping his indigo-wrapped sword, the golden hilt gleaming in the pale light. Layla walking ahead, her saffron robe swirling with each step, charms clicking in nervous rhythm along her sleeves. Her veil fluttered in the cold morning breeze, revealing fierce amber eyes set in a calm, resolute face. "They reached the gates," the king continues, "and found them unguarded. No spearmen in bronze helms, no sorcerers' apprentices chanting beneath archways, just silence. A silence so heavy it pressed upon their chests like iron." Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. In ancient siege warfare, silent gates often signaled surrender or trap. Historians still argue whether Zuleika learned this tactic from Babylonian or Persian conquest traditions. But either way, it worked. Layla pressed her palm to the carved iron gate, whispering syllables that sparked faint blue flickers across its darkened surface. The sigils engraved there twisted in silent agony before vanishing entirely. She exhaled and stepped back. "She knows we are here," she murmured. Jahan swallowed, his throat dry as desert bone. "Then let us enter before she grows bored." The gates swung open at her touch, revealing a shadow-choked hall lined with shattered ivory statues. Each broken figure had once depicted queens of black sands, women robed in flowing marble silks, their faces serene with the eternal dignity of the dead. Now their heads lay scattered upon black granite floors, hollow eyes staring blankly into darkness. "They passed through the hall," the king says softly, sorrow curling around each word. "And there, at the throne dais, she sat waiting. You see her clearly. Zuleika, crowned in curling obsidian horns that gleamed like polished jet. Her cloak of sapphire-black scales spread across the dais steps, pooling around her feet. Her eyes burned with swirling blue fire as she rested her chin upon a claw-tipped hand, studying them with languid amusement. "Jahan," she purred, her voice echoing off the broken marble columns. "Son of the Ruby Coast, bearer of the exile's curse, and Layla al-Sahira, the scholar who meddles in forgotten truths. Have you come to kneel before your queen?" Layla raised her chin defiantly. "We have come to end your reign." Zuleika laughed softly, the sound like falling shards of glass. "Oh, little mouse," she said, lips curling to reveal faintly pointed teeth. "I am no longer queen. I am beyond queen. I am the flesh of darkness. I am the daughter of silence. I am eternity given form." Her voice grew low and mocking as her eyes flickered toward Jahan. "And what will you do, exiled prince? Strike me down with your grandfather's blade?" He drew his sword slowly, the indigo cloth falling away to reveal intricate silver damascene along the steel, inlaid with curling wave patterns. He pointed it at her, though his arm trembled faintly. "I will end your curse, and free the king you betrayed." For a moment, silence pooled like oil around them. Then Zuleika's eyes narrowed. Her lips curved into a smile so slow and cruel it turned your stomach cold. "Very well," she murmured, rising from her throne in one smooth, inhuman motion. Her scaled cloak shifted behind her, revealing twin skeletal wings curling against her back. Thin membranes stretched between bone spines of obsidian black. As she stepped forward, her claws clicked upon the granite floor with a sound like daggers tapping glass. She raised one clawed hand, and with a flick of her fingers, the shadows around her throne coalesced into a writhing mass. Screams rose within it, faint, distant wails that clawed at your ears with desperate agony. The king's voice quivers. They were the souls of those she had consumed, their suffering bound to her magic, granting her immortality. Historians still argue whether soul consumption was literal or symbolic. Some suggest these tales reflected mass executions and psychological terror. But as you stand within the king's memory, hearing those muffled screams, it feels all too real. Layla raised her binding stone high, chanting words that split the air with blue lightning. Sigils burned into existence around the stone, floating in a shifting halo. Zuleika snarled, her wings snapping open with a crack like splitting wood. She lunged forward, claw outstretched. Jahan moved first. He leapt to stand between Layla and the queen, swinging his sword in a shining arc that clashed against Zuleika's claw with a shower of blue-white sparks. The force sent him skidding backwards across the granite tiles, his sandals scraping until his heels caught against a fallen column. "Fight her!" Layla cried, her voice ringing like a bronze bell. "The binding stone can only hold if her will is broken." Zuleika laughed softly, stalking forward with terrifying grace. "You think binding stones can stop me, girl? I have eaten gods who forged such toys." The king's voice lowers, weighted with sorrow. But Layla stood firm. She raised the stone again and sang words I had not heard since the birth of the world. For a moment, you almost hear them yourself, curling syllables that burn behind your eyes, syllables that taste of moonlight on desert dunes, of blood spilled upon obsidian altars, of sorrow so deep it carves rivers through the soul. Zuleika screamed then, her voice splitting stone and bone alike as blue fire erupted from her chest. The shadows around her throne writhed wildly, shrieking in agony as her power faltered. And in that moment, the king whispers, hope dared to bloom again within my silent heart. His eyes close, and his next breath rattles faintly with grief and anticipation. But victory, he murmurs, is never so simple. The king's stone eyelids flutter open again, and moonlight catches in his gaze like trapped tears. He draws in a slow, grinding breath before continuing, his voice heavy with grief and quiet rage. Zuleika staggered back. He whispers, her scream still echoing through shattered halls as blue fire burned across her chest, searing away scales to reveal glimpses of pale human skin beneath. You see her clutching her breast, claws digging into her own flesh as wisps of black smoke curled from her wounds. The shadows at her feet hissed in anguish, slithering away to hide among cracked pillars. Layla pressed forward. The king continues. Her binding stone glowed with a furious white-blue radiance, casting rippling sigils across the broken floor. Jahan scrambled to his feet, breathing hard, sweat dripping from his brow. He raised his sword again, voice hoarse with terror and determination. "End it!" he cried. "Now, Layla!" But Zuleika's eyes snapped open, blazing with a wrath that turned your blood cold. Her lips curled back in a snarl, revealing fangs that glistened like polished onyx. "You dare to wound me?" she hissed, her voice splitting into overlapping tones, as though a dozen demons spoke through her throat. "You dare to think you can bind me?" With a flick of her wrist, she lashed out a clawed hand. Black lightning erupted from her fingers, slamming into Layla's chest and hurling her backwards into a cracked column. The stone pillar trembled with the impact, dust and broken mosaics raining down upon her crumpled body. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. In medieval Persian warfare, black powder was used to create thundercrack grenades that stunned war elephants with noise rather than harm. Zuleika's black lightning felt like a spiritual echo of that, a weapon of shock, terror, and domination rather than mere flame. Jahan screamed her name, lunging forward. His blade slashed across Zuleika's outstretched arm, severing scales and drawing thick black blood that steamed upon the granite tiles. She roared, wings flaring wide as her tail, long and barbed like a manticore's, whipped around to catch him across the ribs. The force sent him sprawling onto his back, breath knocked from his lungs, his sword skittering across the floor to clatter near Layla's unmoving hand. Historians still argue, the king murmurs softly, Whether Layla died instantly from the lightning strike or lingered to hear Jahan's final prayer, he pauses, stone throat grinding faintly as though swallowing tears. But I saw her eyes flutter open as Jahan crawled toward her. I saw her lips move, her final spell. You lean forward, heart pounding. What did she say? You whisper. The king's gaze pierces yours, glowing faintly with moonlit sorrow. She whispered words that tasted of rain and eternity. Her binding stone flared one last time, blazing with a brilliance so fierce it burned away shadows in the deepest corners of that hall. You see it clearly now. Layla's henna'd fingers curling around the stone as her lips moved in silent prayer. Light erupted from her chest in curling silver tendrils, weaving around Zuleika's arms, her wings, her horns. The demon queen shrieked, clawing at her own skin as the bindings tightened, forcing her to her knees. Jahan dragged himself to Layla's side, blood seeping from the gash torn by Zuleika's tail. His trembling hands cradled her head as tears dripped onto her burned cheek. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Please, gods, stay with me." Her amber eyes flickered with faint amusement and infinite sorrow. She lifted her free hand to touch his cheek. Her voice was soft as drifting sand. "You must finish this," she whispered. "For the king, and for yourself." Then her eyes closed, her final breath leaving her lips like a fading desert breeze. The binding stone cracked in her hand, fissures spreading across its surface as glowing sigils flickered and died. "No!" Jahan roared, his voice echoing with such raw anguish that even Zuleika faltered, her writhing form shuddering against the weakening bindings. He lowered Layla gently to the ground, pressing his forehead to hers one final time before rising unsteadily to his feet. Blood dripped from his side as he staggered toward his fallen sword. Zuleika rose slowly. The king whispers. Her bindings fell away like torn silk, her laughter low and vicious. "You think to slay me, exile?" she sneered, her claws dripping with black venom. "I have devoured gods and scholars alike. What are you to me but a meal not yet tasted?" But Jahan only lifted his sword, his face set with unbreakable resolve. His voice shook with grief and fury as he spoke. "I am a prince of the Ruby Coast," he whispered. "I am my mother's son, my father's heir, and my people's hope. And though I have lost everything, I still have my honor. I still have this." With a final cry, he lunged forward. The blade sang through the air, its silver patterns catching what little dawn light crept through ruined windows. The steel buried itself in Zuleika's chest, driving deep until the hilt struck scaled flesh. Her scream split the air, shattering every remaining mosaic tile on the throne dais. Her wings beat wildly, sending gales of choking black smoke across the hall. But Jahan held the sword firm. His feet braced against the floor as her claws tore at his shoulders and neck. Light erupted from the wound, the king whispers. Blue and gold and silver fire roared out from her chest, spiraling upwards to crack the dome overhead and split stone columns to their foundations. You see it, Zuleika's body convulsing as the demon within her was torn away by Jahan's blade. Her wings crumbled to ash, her scales blackened and fell like burning feathers, and her eyes, those terrible, beautiful eyes, dimmed until they were merely human once more. She fell to her knees before him. The king murmurs, his voice trembling with sorrow. And for a moment, she was just Zuleika again, the woman I loved. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered his name, her voice small and broken. "Forgive me," she said, but Jahan only closed his eyes as he twisted the blade. A final breath rattled from her lips before her body slumped to the ground. dead at last. Silence filled the hall as the first true dawn in centuries lit the shattered palace windows. And that, the king whispers, was how my curse began to unravel. His voice fades into the quiet, leaving only the sigh of dawn winds and the scent of desert roses drifting through memory's ruined halls. The king's eyes close, and for a long moment, you think he has drifted back into the silent prison of his own thoughts. But then his stone chest rises once more with a rattling sigh, and his voice drifts out into the echoing hall. After Zuleika fell, he whispers. The fortress trembled. The shadows binding its stones flickered and writhed, no longer anchored by her will. You see it clearly. Blackened marble columns shaking with deep groans, cracks snaking along obsidian tiles as the demon queen's lifeless body lay at Jahan's feet. Her scales crumbled to dust, blowing away in hot desert winds that poured through shattered windows. Jahan stood there. The king continues, his voice trembling with old grief. Blood streaming from his wounds, his hands still clenched around the sword buried in her chest. He could barely stand. His legs shook with exhaustion, grief, and agony. At his feet, Layla's body lay still, her binding stone cracked in her palm, its glow extinguished. The rising sun sent golden shafts of light through crumbling arches, illuminating the hall in a glow that turned broken ivory mosaics to molten gold. He staggered to her side, the king murmurs, and fell to his knees. He gathered her in his arms, cradling her lifeless head against his chest. His voice grows softer, distant with pain. He wept then. He wept for her sacrifice, for his shattered kingdom, for the life he would never return to on the Ruby Coast. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Ancient Persian warriors were forbidden to weep openly, as tears were believed to weaken the spirit's resolve. Yet Jahan's tears did not weaken him. They carved away the last of his fear, leaving only pure, bright resolve within. Finally, he laid Layla's body gently upon the dais steps and rose to his feet, sword still gleaming with the demon queen's black blood. The fortress walls shook with a great cracking sound, the king says, his voice deepening. Without Zuleika's power, the magic binding her palace began to unravel. Shadows peeled away like burning oil, revealing once white marble streaked with centuries of soot. You hear it in your mind, the groaning rumbles of stone grinding against stone as towers crumbled and shattered into dunes below. Flocks of crows took flight in shrieking clouds, spiraling skyward in panicked black swarms. Jahan limped from the throne hall, the king whispers, and walked out into the dawn. Behind him, the palace collapsed into itself with a thunderous roar that sent shockwaves across the valley of whispering bones. Sand erupted in great hissing waves, burying shattered pillars and skeletal remains alike beneath golden dunes. The ground trembled with each collapsing tower, and for a moment, dawn itself seemed to quake in mourning for all that had been lost. Historians still argue, the king murmurs, whether this collapse was caused by structural decay or the final death of her sorcery. But I know. I felt her curse shatter. He falls silent again, and you sense the shift of his thoughts, the memory turning its page. Jahan returned to me at sunset, the king whispers, his clothes torn and stained with blood, his skin blistered by 2 days under the desert sun. You see him climbing the ruined palace steps once more, his feet leaving faint trails of blood across fallen mosaics. His hair was tangled with sand and sweat, and his eyes burned with grief and triumph. He fell before me. The king continues softly. He pressed his forehead to my stone feet and wept. The stone chest rises and falls slowly, as though the king is breathing each remembered tear. He spoke words I will never forget. His voice grows quiet, trembling with emotion. "I have slain her," Jahan whispered. "I have slain the queen who betrayed you. But her death will not bring your freedom. Will it?" The king pauses, his stone eyes glowing faintly in the deepening dusk of the hall. "And he was right," he whispers. "Zuleika's death broke her half of the curse, but Kadir's magic still bound me. Her betrayal forged the chain, his sorcery fastened its lock." Jahan sat before him for many hours as dusk faded to velvet night. He washed the demon queen's blood from his blade with water poured from Layla's silver flask. He lit a small fire in the shattered brazier and burned her remaining scrolls, whispering each prayer she had taught him to carry her wisdom skyward on curling smoke. At dawn, the king continues, his voice rough with memory. "He stood and placed his hand upon my stone knee. 'I will find him,' he vowed. 'I will hunt Kadir to the ends of the earth and break the last of your chains.'" The king exhales a low, grinding sigh, shaking his head slowly. I tried to speak, to thank him, to beg him not to throw away his life, but my lips remained frozen. My voice remained locked in silent stone. You see Jahan turn away, wrapping Layla's binding stone fragments in a strip of saffron silk. His silhouette slipped down the ruined hall steps as dawn rose gold across the endless dunes. That was the last I saw of him. The king whispers, his eyes distant with loss. Whether he succeeded or fell in his quest, I do not know. Historians still argue whether Kadir was slain by mortal blade, driven mad by his own spells, or still wanders desert ruins, his body rotting yet immortal. He closes his eyes as if feeling the weight of centuries settle upon his shoulders. "But I waited," he whispers, "for his return, for freedom, for death." Silence returns to the hall, broken only by faint desert winds whispering through shattered arches above. You sense the grief of his endless waiting wrapping around you like a burial shroud. "And so," the king murmurs, his voice low and hollow. Hope began to fade. The king's stone gaze glimmers in the quiet moonlight, and his chest rises with another rumbling sigh as the next memory unfurls within him. "Decades passed," he whispers. "Then centuries. The dunes shifted, burying the shattered fortress and throne hall beneath mountains of wind-carved sand. You see it through his words, golden dunes swallowing ivory pillars until only a single broken dome jutted from the wasteland like the rib of a fallen giant. Black scorpions scuttled across silent courtyards. Date palms withered to dry, twisted husks, and always, the hot desert winds howled with faint, sorrowful voices. No one came for a long while. The king continues, his voice faint as drifting ash. No pilgrims, no priests, no wanderers, only silence. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Medieval Arab navigators used the desert's night winds to estimate distances between oases. They believed each valley had its own wind song signature, almost like an audible map. Perhaps it was those sighing winds that first drew wanderers back to the buried palace. "One day," the king murmurs, "a caravan appeared on the horizon, traders from the Sapphire Gulf, seeking lost cities rumored to hold gold and sapphires and scrolls of ancient wisdom. You see them, long lines of camels draped in indigo cloth, their hooves sinking into hot dunes, turbaned men with sunburned faces leading them forward with flicks of woven palm ropes, bronze bells clinking with each weary step. They dug into the sand to unearth the domes," the king whispers. "They pried open fallen doors and searched every chamber with flickering oil lamps. His voice deepens with a faint growl. But when they found me, frozen on my stone throne, crowned in crumbling gold, they did not kneel. They did not pray. They laughed. He pauses, stone hands curling faintly upon his lap. They said I was a statue worth more broken into pieces than kept whole. They argued whether to chisel off my head or arms first for transport. You flinch slightly at the thought, your chest tightening as the king's voice quivers with remembered humiliation. But then, he continues softly, their leader stepped forward. He was a tall man with a thick, black beard braided with gold rings. His eyes were sharp as obsidian blades. The traitor circled the statue slowly, his calloused fingers tracing weathered carvings along the throne's arms. Finally, he shook his head and spat into the sand. "Leave it," he ordered. "Too heavy to carry across the dunes." And cursed, "No doubt, its eyes follow me like a demon's. Smash it and bury the pieces." The king falls silent for a long moment, moonlight pooling around his unmoving form. Historians still argue whether ancient curses truly harmed grave robbers or simply frightened them into madness. But when their workers raised hammers to my stone limbs, a sandstorm howled down from the western cliffs. You see it, a black wall of sand and wind roaring toward them like the maw of a great desert leviathan. Camels brayed in terror, tugging at their ropes as traders screamed, dropping tools to clutch their turbans against the gale. The winds swallowed them whole, the king whispers, his voice vibrating with faint satisfaction. Their bodies were buried beneath dunes within minutes. Their bleached bones still lie there, somewhere beneath your feet. His eyes close briefly. And when they open again, their glow is tinged with a weary sorrow. I was grateful then for the storm, but gratitude is a fleeting comfort when one is bound in stone. Years passed. Decades melted into centuries. Sometimes sand buried his hall completely. Sometimes storms scoured it clean again. His only companions were the lizards scuttling across marble floors and the whispering winds weaving lullabies through shattered arches. Then, many lifetimes later, he whispers, another came. His stone chest rises faintly with remembered anticipation. She was an old woman, bent nearly double with age. Her hair was white as desert salt, and her eyes milky with blindness. Yet she walked unerringly to my throne, guided only by a gnarled staff carved with snake sigils. You see her, her sand-colored robe billowing around thin ankles as she shuffles across the silent hall. Her staff taps upon cracked mosaic tiles with a steady, echoing rhythm. She stood before me, the king murmurs, and tilted her clouded gaze up to my face. Then she laughed, a deep, warm laugh that echoed off fallen pillars like temple bells. She raised her staff, its serpent-carved head glinting dully in moonlight, and tapped his stone foot twice. Still here, eh?" she cackled. Kadir was thorough indeed. The king's voice trembles. She spoke my name with familiarity, as though she had known me all her life. She sat before him upon a woven reed mat, unpacking a small clay brazier from her satchel. She lit it with flint and tinder, filling the hall with the scent of burning frankincense. She told me stories. The king whispers, stories of all I had missed, empires rising and falling, oceans crossed by ships with black powder cannons, new gods worshipped in stone temples that dwarfed my grandest palace. Here's your mainstream historical fact for tonight. The invention of black powder cannon revolutionized medieval warfare, allowing fortresses once deemed impenetrable to fall within days of sustained bombardment. Kingdoms that clung to thick stone walls without adapting often fell to ruin, just as Black Sands had. She stayed with me 3 nights. The king murmurs softly. sleeping beside my throne, curled in her robes like a desert fox. On the dawn of the 4th day, she rose and kissed my stone foot. Her milky eyes turned up to his frozen face, and she smiled a toothless smile. "You were a good king," she whispered. "Remember that." Then she gathered her staff, slung her satchel over her shoulder, and walked into the desert sunrise without looking back. The king's stone chest rises in a deep, shuddering breath. "That," he whispers, his voice trembling with a faint warmth you've not heard before, "was the last kindness I was shown." His eyes close slowly, glowing softly in the pale dawn light seeping into the ruined hall. "And so," he breathes. I waited again. The king's stone fingers twitch faintly upon his throne, as though grasping at something long lost. His gaze remains closed to the dim hall, but his voice flows out, quiet and ragged with the strain of ancient memory. "After the old woman left," he whispers, "I slipped into a deeper stillness. My thoughts blurred into drifting fragments. Days and nights passed like falling grains of sand in an endless hourglass." He pauses, the grinding sound of his stone throat echoing softly. "Until the song," your breath stills as he continues, voice tinged with the faintest wonder. "One dawn," he murmurs, "a sound woke me from my frozen dreams. A song carried upon the morning wind. It drifted through fallen arches and coiled around my ears with such sweetness that for a moment I thought I was dreaming again." You see it clearly. A young man walking barefoot across the dunes, his cloak flaring out behind him like a crimson banner. His hair is dark and tangled from days in the desert wind, and he carries a small clay flute carved with simple wave motifs. He played a melody older than kingdoms. The king whispers, "A song of dawns and dunes, of the sea kissing burning sands." Historians still argue whether this melody originated from Sumerian reed, flute hymns, or Bedouin goat horn chants. But it matters not, for to me, it was life. The young man entered the ruined hall, his feet stirring drifting sand across cracked mosaics. His gaze swept over toppled pillars and faded murals until it settled upon the stone figure upon the throne. He lowered his flute, the king murmurs, and his eyes widened. Then he smiled. "Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight." Medieval Persian explorers believed that smiling upon discovering ruins appeased the jinn guarding them. A smile was seen as a gesture of peace, or an acknowledgement of shared tragedy. The young man approached, his cloak whispering over broken tiles. He raised a sunburned hand and rested it lightly upon the king's stone knee. "Peace be upon you, old king," he said softly. "I have come to learn your story." The king's stone chest shudders faintly at the memory. "For the first time in centuries, I felt something beyond grief. I felt hope." The young man made camp before the throne, spreading a woven reed mat and lighting a tiny brass lamp. Each evening he played his flute, its notes curling around fallen pillars like drifting incense smoke. Each dawn, he sat cross-legged upon his mat, writing with a reed pen upon long scrolls of papyrus. "He recorded every carving upon my throne," the king whispers. "Every sigil along the dais, every half-crumbled glyph upon shattered columns. For weeks, he remained there, studying murals that depicted forgotten battles and ancient gods. By lamplight, he read aloud from scrolls he carried in his satchel, stories of distant empires and lost cities swallowed by oceans. He read of Atlantis, the king murmurs, of Lemuria, of sunken Iram of the Pillars. Historians still argue whether these cities truly existed or merely symbolized humanity's hubris. But I knew then, all kingdoms fade, even mine. One night, the young man sat before him, lamp casting warm golden halos upon his tired face. His dark eyes glistened as he gazed up at the silent king. "I wish I could free you," he whispered, "but I am no mage or prince. I am only a scribe, wandering the world to record its dying wonders before they vanish forever." The king falls silent for a long moment, as though gathering courage from the shadows around him. "But even his presence," he whispers, "was enough, for each word he read, each note he played upon his flute, pulled me back from the edge of nothingness." Here's your mainstream historical fact for tonight. Scribes in medieval Baghdad's House of Wisdom were trained in medicine, astronomy, and geometry alongside literature. They were not mere recorders of knowledge, but preservers and guardians of humanity's fragile memory. On the 43rd dawn, the king continues softly. The young man packed his scrolls and rose to leave. He placed his flute before my stone feet, as an offering or perhaps as a promise. You see him bowing deeply, his forehead touching the mosaic floor, before turning away into the desert light. His crimson cloak flared out behind him like a dying sun as he vanished beyond the dunes. His flute remains here still, the king murmurs, voice trembling. Its clay cracked with age, its reeds shriveled to dust. But each dawn, I remember its song. He exhales a grinding sigh. And so, centuries rolled on. Empires rose beyond these sands, steel cities and silver towers, yet none came to free me. His voice grows fainter, tinged with weary sorrow. My name faded from scrolls, my deeds blurred to legend, and soon, even legend forgot me. The hall falls silent except for faint desert winds rustling the drifting sands around your feet. You sense the weight of his endless solitude pressing upon you like the hush of a tomb. "But now," the king whispers, his eyes flickering open to meet yours. "You sit before me. You listen to my words. And I remember again that I was once a man, a ruler, a beloved." His chest rises with a trembling sigh, and his voice falls to a hushed, fragile murmur. "And for tonight, that is enough." The king's gaze glows faintly in the moonlit ruins, and though his stone eyelids remain half lowered, you sense his focus sharpening upon you. "Time," he whispers, "grew meaningless. My mind drifted like wind-blown dust through half-remembered memories. The faces of my queens blurred. The voices of my children faded to silence." He exhales a rattling sigh. "But there were moments, tiny flickers of clarity amidst centuries of emptiness." You lean closer as his voice lowers to a hushed murmur. "Once," he says softly, "there came a girl, barely 13 summers old. She wore rough linen robes and carried a basket upon her hip. Her dark hair was braided simply, and her sand-cracked feet were bare. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. In medieval Arabia, young girls were often sent to gather desert herbs for medicine. Some of these included frankincense resin, myrrh sap, and lavender sprigs, used for salves, teas, and fumigation rites alike. She entered the ruined hall at dawn." The king continues, sunlight catching upon her braids as she walked slowly toward me. He pauses, stone chest rising with a faint grinding sound. She did not scream or flee. She simply looked at me for a long time, then smiled. You see her, standing barefoot upon cracked mosaic tiles, gazing up at the massive stone king upon his crumbling throne. Dust motes floated around her in golden beams, swirling like drifting embers. She set down her basket, he whispers, and unpacked small bundles wrapped in faded cloth, dried dates, desert figs, flatbread speckled with sesame seeds. She arranged them neatly upon the floor before me, like offerings at a shrine. The king's stone lips tremble faintly. Then she knelt, folded her hands in her lap, and spoke. "My grandmother said you were a good king," she whispered. "She said you loved your people like your own children, that you built roads to the sea so merchants could sell their spices, and dug wells so the desert villages could drink sweet water, that you planted date groves to feed the poor." His eyes flicker closed, moonlight glimmering upon silent tears etched into marble cheeks. "She sat there for hours," he whispers, telling me stories her grandmother had told her, stories of my reign, of harvest festivals beneath bronze lanterns, of marriage feasts where dancers spun so fast their veils blurred like white flames, of my eldest son's wedding, where 400 white doves were released at dawn. Here's your mainstream historical fact for tonight. In medieval Baghdad, releasing flocks of doves at weddings symbolized the souls of the bride and groom uniting to find peace together in the afterlife. Even while alive, the tradition spread along caravan routes, including to Black Sands. When she finished her stories, the king murmurs, she stood. She left her small meal before me, pressed her palm to my stone foot, and smiled again. She turned to leave, lifting her empty basket to her hip, but just before stepping into the blinding desert sun beyond the ruined archway, she paused. "Thank you," she said, "for everything you did. I will tell your story to my children, so you will never be forgotten." His voice trembles with a grief so deep it vibrates within your bones. And then she was gone. Her footsteps faded into the sand. But her promise remained. Silence falls between you for a moment. The ruined hall seems to breathe around you, the whispering winds rising to stir drifting dunes outside, carrying faint scents of salt and jasmine. "Historians still argue," the king murmurs, "whether memories truly fade or simply sleep until someone speaks their name again. For me, her words woke something within my frozen soul." His gaze sharpens upon yours, glowing with a weary intensity. "You sit here now, listening, hearing the truths no scroll has recorded, and in your memory, I live again." He exhales another sigh, slower this time, as if the weight upon his chest has shifted from despair to quiet surrender. Years passed after she left. He continues softly. "I remained alone once more. Sandstorms came and went. Lizards scuttled across my feet. Desert foxes nested between my stone legs, raising litters of kits who played beneath my silent gaze. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Fennec foxes, with their enormous ears and nocturnal habits, were believed by desert tribes to carry whispers of the dead. Their yips and growls at night were thought to be spirits speaking through them, offering guidance or warnings. One winter," the king whispers, "a great storm tore down the remaining walls of my throne hall. For days, sand buried me up to my chest, leaving only my crowned head visible to the pale desert moon." His voice falls to a near whisper, the words curling around you like cool midnight wind. "Buried, yet awake. Frozen, yet dreaming. Waiting for one who might speak my name again." He pauses, stone throat grinding faintly as though swallowing tears. "And tonight," he murmurs, "you sit here before me. You ask me to speak, and so I do." His glowing eyes lock upon yours with quiet gratitude and infinite sadness. "For that," he breathes, "I thank you." The king's stone chest rises once more with a hollow, echoing sigh, and his voice grows softer, tinged with an exhaustion carved by centuries. "After the winter storms," he whispers, "the desert swallowed all that remained of my palace. The dunes rose higher each year, burying broken arches and ivory mosaics beneath waves of golden sand." He pauses, eyelids lowering as though reliving each drifting century. I was alone for so long that even silence forgot me. You see it clearly. The crowned king buried to his chest, his stone eyes gazing endlessly at shifting dunes lit by moonlight and dawn, watched only by drifting sand snakes and night-flying owls. Then the dream came. His voice trembles faintly, a vibration echoing through the ruined hall. It began at midnight, he whispers. When the crescent moon rose low above the dunes, I felt warmth upon my stone skin, the warmth of a human hand. You see a figure approaching, a man cloaked in shadow-dyed linen, his face hidden by a hood stitched with silver threads that catch moonlight like falling tears. His sandals whisper across cold sand as he kneels before the buried king. He spoke my name, the king murmurs, voice quivering. He spoke it in the old tongue, the tongue I used to sing lullabies to my children. His stone chest shudders. And as he spoke, power curled around his fingers like curling blue flame. He pressed his palm to my forehead, and for the first time in countless centuries, I felt warmth spread through me. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Medieval Persian sorcerers believed that names carried fragments of the soul. To speak a true name in its sacred form was to summon the living essence of the person, even from beyond death. The man's hood fell back, the king continues softly, revealing a pale, scarred face with eyes black as obsidian. You see him clearly. Thin lips, a faint black tattoo winding up his throat like a snake, and eyes as empty as night sky above desert ruins. He whispered words I did not understand, words that burned into my mind like molten gold, searing away the fog of centuries. The king exhales a rattling sigh, voice deepening with dread. And then, I remembered everything, every joy, every betrayal, every scream, every funeral song sung for my wives, my sons, my daughters. He falls silent for a long moment, the faint desert wind rustling the drifting sands around your knees. Historians still argue, he murmurs, whether pain cleanses or destroys. That night, I learned the truth. It does both. The man pressed his other palm to the king's stone chest. Blue flame flared, illuminating buried pillars and the torn remnants of royal banners fluttering beneath the sand. Sigils burned across the stone body, intricate curling glyphs of protection, dominion, and binding. He bound me again, the king whispers, his voice almost inaudible. He locked my soul within this prison so tightly that not even death could claim me. You hear the faintest crack in his tone as he continues, trembling. But before he left, he spoke one final word, a word that echoed through the marrow of my spirit with the sweetness of poisoned honey. His glowing eyes lift to yours. He said, "Soon, here's your mainstream historical fact for tonight." The word soon, in Old Persian, spanta, carried layered meanings of inevitability, holy approach, and doom. It was often used in temple inscriptions foretelling the arrival of divine judgment or royal retribution. The king's stone lips tremble faintly. And then he was gone. His footprints vanished beneath dawn winds, leaving me buried beneath rising dunes once more. He falls silent for a long time, only the sigh of sand sliding down half-buried pillars filling the hushed hall. Finally, his voice returns, quieter, breaking gently against your listening mind. Years passed. The word haunted me. Was he a priest come to seal my fate? A sorcerer seeking immortality? Or merely a shadow, a fragment of my own dying dreams? You see the dunes shifting under burning sunrises, dust storms howling black across broken domes, lightning flickering in distant clouds. Always the king remains, frozen in darkness and dawn alike. Then, tonight, he whispers. You came. His stone eyes lock upon yours, glowing softly with weary gratitude and a sorrow so deep it aches within your ribs. You came with quiet breath and listening heart. You asked nothing of me but my story. You gave me back my name. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Desert tribes believed names shared in darkness, forged soul bonds that lasted beyond death. Perhaps tonight, in this hush of ruined halls and drifting sand, you have become his final listener, the keeper of his unbroken memory. The king's stone chest rises with one final, trembling sigh. And so, he whispers, voice trailing into silence, I remain here, waiting for soon to come. Moonlight fades beyond the arches as dawn begins to rise over the endless dunes, casting pale gold across his weathered crown. And with dawn, he breathes, hope fades once more. The king's chest rises with a final deep grinding sigh. His voice emerges faint and ragged, like the last breath of a dying storm. Dawn breaks now, he whispers, and with it comes the silence I have come to know so well. You see the pale gold of morning pouring through broken arches, illuminating drifting dunes where wild grasses tremble beneath the first desert breeze. Shadows recede across cracked mosaics, revealing old stains of blood and soot from battles long forgotten. I feel the warmth of sun upon my stone crown, the king murmurs softly, and remember what it felt like upon my skin, upon the curls of my children as they raced barefoot through palace gardens at dawn. His voice grows distant, trembling with grief that no centuries could dull. I remember my youngest daughter, clutching her wooden doll to her chest as she reached up to grasp my fingers. Her eyes were the color of wet earth after rain. Her laughter still echoes somewhere within me. Here's your mainstream historical fact for tonight. In ancient Mesopotamian courts, children's dolls were carved from cedar wood and often inlaid with tiny lapis lazuli eyes. They were offered to temple goddesses when the girls came of age, symbolizing the death of childhood and birth of duty. The king falls silent, stone eyelids closing halfway as though he sinks back into that memory. Gardens scented with jasmine, white doves fluttering over marble fountains, the hush of dawn prayers rising from palace courtyards. Historians still argue, he whispers, whether memory is a blessing or a curse for those who endure. Tonight, I can tell you, it is both. The breeze rises gently, rustling sand across the hall like a mother's whisper to a restless child. You see small desert sparrows flutter into the ruined dome, chirping softly before they flit out into the growing light. And now, the king murmurs, his voice breaking into a hush softer than drifting dust. I have told you everything. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Ancient Persian priests believed that speaking one's full story before death allowed the soul to cross the bridge to paradise unburdened. Perhaps, in sharing this tale, the king's spirit drifts a little closer to that distant dawn. His glowing eyes open once more, fixing upon you with infinite sorrow and quiet gratitude. Thank you, he breathes. Thank you for letting me remember that I was loved, that I ruled, that I existed. He falls silent, and for a long moment, there is only the sigh of dawn winds weaving through broken arches and the pale glow of sun upon silent stone. You realize that within this ruined hall, surrounded by shadows of forgotten glory, you have become his final witness, the keeper of his unbroken name, his last dawn. Slowly, his stone eyelids close, his chest stills. Moonlight fades from his crown as dawn crowns him anew in gold. You sit there quietly now, letting your breath soften with the hush of dawn seeping through fallen arches. The ruined palace around you feels calmer, as though the grief etched into its silent walls exhales a faint sigh of relief into the warm desert breeze. Golden light spills across drifting dunes beyond the broken dome, illuminating rippling sands in gentle waves that soothe your tired mind. The king's presence lingers like fading incense, comforting and sorrowful all at once. You let your eyes close, feeling each slow, steady beat of your heart echoing in time with the quiet pulse of this forgotten place. His memories drift through you in gentle fragments, the laughter of his daughters, the songs of old scribes, the scent of frankincense curling into the dawn. Breathe slowly now, in and out. Feel the cool hush of shadows receding beyond half-buried pillars. Feel the warmth of the rising sun wrapping softly around your shoulders, seeping into your bones. Let your chest rise and fall with each peaceful breath as your thoughts drift like moonlit sand across silent dunes. There is nothing you need to do right now. No tasks to remember, no burdens to carry, only the hush of his story settling around you like a protective veil. You are safe here, resting between fading stars and waking sun. In this gentle quiet, know that you carry his name within you, a secret whisper of ancient love and lost honor. Let it fade into your dreams tonight, leaving only stillness behind. You are calm, you are held, and you are free to sleep now. Rest well, my friend.